Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Health, Wealth, and the Ultimate Self. We are here today and we're going to talk about weight and weight loss and why it may be not so easy for someone, even though you're doing everything right. So, What's one thing if you scrolled across the internet, you see all the time on whether it's Instagram, Facebook?
Yep.
I think there's a lot of weekend courses that people just like, hey, it's just about calories in, calories out.
Calories in, calories out. Your one big math equation.
Yeah, you can. It's just you're not doing it. You're not counting your calories. You're not. That's your weight loss issue.
Yep. Low carb, high protein.
Or there's one that I see all the time. Like, no, you should be able to eat your pizza. Like, it's just a calorie in, calorie out, and you're not moving right. You're not exercising. I just
avoid, the 90s. Like, avoid fat because it's 9 calories per.
I laugh because I'm like, take 10 of our patients that are in our clinic with our team who are having weight loss issues. I just imagine, like, take that person that you're seeing simplifying weight loss and weight gain, put them in front of them and just have them say that same commercial, like, it's just calories in, calories out. You're not, I feel like all those 10 people would smack them.
Yeah.
I feel like they'd be so pissed.
Yeah.
They'd be like pitchforks in their hand and chase them out of the room.
Yep.
Because again, ideally calories in, calories out. And a lot of times the people are like, look, I used to be able to work this off. Like I used to be able to lose 5 pounds over a month through diet,
when
through
I was a
exercise.
teenager, I could eat whatever I wanted.
Yeah, I mean, that's a little different.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a high growth rate, but
I
mean, it's just, but like, let's say like when I was 35 or when I was 40, I could lose weight. But then the last 5 years, it's been more difficult. And I've tried this, I've tried that. This, so this is where, can we have an episode that kind of zooms back out like we do and just like, hey, what needs to be happening for somebody to have a good metabolic rate? And then where may there be some sticking points? So start it off.
So I always like to think of like there's 3 major pillars. There's neurological things that can kind of be speed bumps. There's physiological things that can obviously be speed bumps. And there's psychological things that can be speed bumps. So being a neuro guy, I like to talk about the neurological side of things. So if we are, let's say having some type of chronic fight or flight response that my brain is just constantly sending to my body saying like, hey, fight or flight, or inability to regulate sleep-wake cycles, or having these roadblocks to getting deep restful sleep and creating good growth hormone and creating all these opiates and things that we need during the day, these growth hormones and all the other neurotransmitters that we need during the day because we're not sleeping between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. when we make the vast majority of those compounds.
And the other thing too is insulin sensitivity. When you don't sleep around 7 to you get under 7, you start seeing your insulin sensitivity is skewed for the next 24 hours.
Yeah, I mean,
because of the impact of what melatonin does, right? And
so I like to think about it that here's these neurological things. We're kind of going to jump around, but there's neurological things and then the physiological things, like things that are under neurological control, like hormones. Your brain's going to sit here and say, do I have enough testosterone? Do I not have enough testosterone? Should I make more testosterone? Should I make more growth factor? Should I make less growth factor, or making enough growth factor? These different, all these different types of chemicals have to go through a brain filtration, typically hypothalamic response of, are we doing this appropriately? And how am I going to respond to my environment, right? So it's like when someone starts exercising and they're sore for 3 or 4 days.
5 days.
Yeah, 5 days. And for doing it like, I haven't exercised in a while, but it's not like I'm that out of shape, but I'm super sore for a week.
I feel blah.
Yeah, and we know that there's like a neurological aspect to this where it's like the brain's going, you exercise and maybe over-exercised. I mean, that's definitely something to talk about, but your brain's sitting here going, we're having this inflammatory response that's actually doing the opposite of what you're wanting it to. It's actually shutting down your metabolism and not increasing it.
Right? I mean, I always describe that as, the waste pathway, kind of more on the mitochondrial side of it, right? This assembly line of us taking a calorie, whether it's fat, protein, or glucose, and on the other end of it needs to be the ATP that our body runs off of. That's kind of like how good our metabolic rate can be, is how fast this pathway happens. And if for some reason you get into kind of like oxygen deprivation too soon, again, say you're not efficient at delivering, that's normal initially when you start to get back into training. But it's like, hey, being winded 5 days, again, myoglobin's not super efficient at getting to muscles to deliver oxygen. You may be sore that first few times going through it. But again, hey, what's normal versus abnormal? Like 5 days, 6 days, feeling blah. You kind of have to step in and be like, what's happening at the cell level that might be telling the brain that that's going on? And it's just, when we go through this assembly line of taking in a calorie and making ATP or fuel off of it, we create that hydrogen peroxide, the superoxide anions, and lactic acid and all this waste. And we also have to have an antioxidant system that needs to come in and clean that waste up. And if we're already compromised in that department because we've been somebody might have been metabolically challenged for 2 or 3 years before they try to get back on the exercise regimen, or they've had inflammation persisting for a while, then that's who also may overwork out and overtrain initially and have the bad response. And then they just like, I just got to keep on doing it. Doing what?
Push through.
Keep on creating more of this inflammatory response. So
and that's where kind of the physiological side of things is like, that's one way of having an inflammatory response, but there's a million other ways of having inflammation, right? Like food we're putting in. If we're having something that's causing an immune reactivity, maybe that's the problem.
Whoa. You're telling me I can't just eat less of the bad food and lose weight?
Unfortunately,
I'm going to eat 700 calories of Oreos. And I'm still expecting I want to lose weight if I'm burning 1,500. Why might not that work?
I wish it worked that way, but unfortunately, it's there's a difference in nutrient density, and this is one of the big problems I think people have is like, I'm just going to cut down my nutrients, but food nowadays tends to have less nutrients to begin with,
which runs the assembly line of your burning rate. Really.
Exactly, like vitamins and minerals and trace minerals, these things that we can only get from good wholesome food.
Chromium's important for my insulin sensitivity.
A little bit. But where am I getting that chromium from? Is it coming from Oreos?
That's what the fools on the internet say. You can eat what you want as long as you're in a calorie deficit. Like that's their whole message. Where they, again, it's infuriating.
So these nutrient deficiencies, I think, plays a big role in that. And when people get their lab work done, it's like, oh wow, I've got iron deficiency and a B vitamin deficiency and a magnesium deficiency, and I've got all these other signs of deficiencies. Alkaline phosphatase being low, and that's oftentimes induced by a zinc deficiency or some problem with your copper and zinc ratios. There's
high stress.
Basically metabolic stress, like detoxification problems, high viral loads. Like there's all these different things that can cause these inflammatory responses and induce that neurological kind of like, hey, let's conserve. Right? Let's not have a fast metabolism. Let's conserve everything so that I can live longer in this fight or flight reaction.
Get through this threat. Like that's, which again is an intelligent response from the brain. It's like, hey, look, it perceives whether it's a chemokine or an inflammatory response to, again, initiate a conservation model, or you're just high stress. Like again, the other aspect too, like, you're going to see more dysrhythms in glucose and insulin, and again, which starts to mess with and lead to metabolic syndrome in itself as well. So going back to the Oreos, so not only are they horrible in terms of like delivering nutrients, but they're inflammatory. What's the pesticide? Like, what's the glyphosate content in those? Which again is going to beat the snot out of your mitochondria, which burns 90% of takes in and generates 90% of your ATP production from the calories you consume. We know pesticides hit our mitochondrial pathways pretty heavy. But then just on the aspect of like, are you having reactions from a food standpoint? Are you having leaky gut? Are you having like GI barrier issues, which starts this like ramp up of inflammation from the food you eat?
So, the biome aspect of things, like
and the microbiome.
Was Arizona State University study where they did fecal transplant
into the mouse study?
Basically poop transplanted from a healthy mouse into a obese mouse.
There's a obese mouse transplant to two groups of lean mice, right? No, you go ahead.
So now you're getting me,
because I thought they took like obese mice, they transplanted the feces into a group of lean mice, And then they had a group of lean mice, fed them the same diet. Even though they're eating the same diet, the one that had the fecal transplant from the obese mouse group, even though they're on the same diet, they became obese from just the fecal transplant, is what they alluded to. I thought
basically saying like the bacteria was causing them to
Correct.
become obese, not the foods that they were eating, because the food stayed the exact same. For some reason, I thought it was the opposite. Maybe take a look at that.
We can look into
I
it.
thought they were taking fecal transplant from normal weight mice and putting it in obese mice, and they were seeing a weight loss. Because I thought that's what
They
they
might
were
have
trying
done
to
that
do.
study too.
Yeah.
I thought
There's probably a study both ways, because if they show one, you probably can show the other.
you would think.
Yeah, because I thought that was for they were thinking about doing fecal transplants for morbidly obese humans and seeing if there was a change. Check into that. So the inflammatory response from a physiological perspective and environmental perspective and biotoxin perspective, just bad mitochondrial function, and then psychological too. Like we can't kick that out of the way, because what does stress hormone do? Right? It's like there's a bunch of different stress hormone. Everyone thinks cortisol, but it's kind of like the bigger, stronger, more aggressive version that is epinephrine, right? And what I tell people a lot of times when you're running on this stress hormone epinephrine has a prevalence to want to break down muscle as opposed to fat, right? So like instead of breaking down fat when I'm in a starvation mode, I'm going to start breaking down protein. My muscles will start to shrink instead of my fat. And here's one interesting thing that I see.
So you're
pretty
now
frequently.
skinny fat.
Skinny fat, yeah. Unfortunately, like becoming a fairly popular thing. So in the middle of the night, when we're having these blood sugar fluctuations and we start getting these epinephrine increases in the middle of the night, that's people who wake up between usually right around 3 o'clock in the morning. Can sliding scale, but somewhere between 1 and 5 a.m.
They've been fasting long enough.
They've been
where
fasting long enough where their cortisol is kind of like,
trying to
I
raise
can't
up.
do this anymore, and it dips. Their fasting glucose dips. Epinephrine comes in to save the day, so we don't go into a hypoglycemic coma, which is nice.
kind.
Epinephrine lifts it up, and this is like bad dreams. Oftentimes, like people wake up like,
Oh, I got
that was a crazy nightmare. Now my heart's beating.
heart's racing. I'm sweating a little bit.
Yeah, when in reality, it's like a neurological justification for what's happening physiologically. Right? It's like that epinephrine increasing is causing the bad dream, not the bad dreams causing the epinephrine. A lot of people, could be the other way around, but what's ending up happening is in the middle of the night, we're using that epinephrine to basically break down our muscle, and oftentimes epinephrine will
And the glycogen around it too.
epinephrine will over break down that protein or that glycogen and increase your blood sugar. And then where's that blood sugar got to go? I mean, it goes right into fat cell. So we're kind of getting fatter.
So on a lab standpoint, you may see triglycerides are creeping up because again, it tells us instead of you using it as a fuel source, you're actually like trying to generate more and just pack more into adipocytes or fat.
Yeah.
I mean, you also see again, we can go into some lab stuff after, but again, that's a very common picture. You also see a adiponectin, a hormone that your fat cells should secrete to be saying, hey, look, you're fasting, come after me.
Yep.
The worse you get in this metabolic storm, almost would call it, is like you actually see adiponectin starts to get suppressed, even though it should be like recruiting itself to be a metabolic fuel for you. And those are where people get incredibly frustrated because they're like, man, I don't get it. And then what if that same person having this like anxiety, stress response is like, look, I saw this guy or this lady on the internet and she said intermittent fasting is going to be the best thing since sliced bread for me.
Yep.
What's that going to do for their fasting hormones?
I mean, it's just going to absolutely tank.
It's just like, I was like to patients, like it's like taking a small fire. You're just going to take some gasoline. Do you want to like be around to see the response? No. It's probably going to puff up in your face.
Yeah, this is where intermittent fasting is interesting because people come in all the time. I started intermittent fasting and I've actually gained weight. And it's like, okay, so you're also doing calorie deficit. You're doing intermittent fasting where you're doing 16, 18, 20-hour fasts and you're gaining weight? Like how, if you were a calorie in, calorie out kind of person, like
Again,
the math would add up. But in this case, it's like I'm decreasing my calories by several hundred a day. I'm only eating between like 1 and 6 in the afternoon, and I'm gaining weight. Or I'm not seeing any weight loss, but now my brain can't work.
Yeah.
Now I'm needing naps, and now I'm having a hard time staying asleep, and now I'm seeing like these adrenal issues.
Well, and again, some people can see results with it,
Absolutely.
but it's knowing when it should be a tool in the toolbox versus when it shouldn't. And again, so that like bad stress hormone patient or kind of dysrhythmic cortisol, adrenaline patient, most of the time is not going to be a favorable response to the, hey, now you're going to go, not only are you going 8 hours fasting and you're seeing issues, we're going to just add 5 or 6 or 8 more hours onto that, and just like keep on kicking that
Oh, by the way,
system while
like
you're down.
coffee.
Oh yeah, hey, but
Coffee's not breaking your fast like that.
But what's,
you know,
it's a nice little stimulant to kind of feed into that.
Yeah, just pushes your cortisol, pushes those adrenals, pushes that epinephrine, norepinephrine pathway in the brain even harder.
So on a lab standpoint, you know, kind of things that I think are really, our team likes to look at is reverse T3.
Absolutely, yeah.
Fasting cortisol is important. Because again, you know, if you're over fasting, one of the signs you may start to see is reverse T3 is going to creep up. And again, that may, you know, reverse T3 is an inactive thyroid metabolite that, again, you're seeing an increase because it's trying to, you know, compete with thyroid receptors to blunt your metabolism versus active hormone. And so one of the markers I never see people really do a ton of, unless you're really kind of trying to be very fine-tuned, is looking at your free T3 to reverse T3 ratios. That should be greater than 20. And what you start to see is somebody has like a free T3 of 2.7 that is functionally low. You'll see their reverse T3 go functionally high into like the low 20s, which crashes their free T3 to reverse T3 ratio to like 11. And you're like, oh, I don't know why. Like I can't, my metabolic rate's being slowed down. Yeah, because the thyroid is not able to talk to the cell to tell it to function. On top of what is cortisol doing to receptor activity, it's slowing it down. Stress hormone is going to dampen that interaction.
Absolutely, yeah. So you're basically taking a race car engine and basically saying like, let's just turn the ignition off.
Yep. Yeah, and it's, so there's, you know, stress hormone, cortisol. I mean, we talked about the inflammatory, like the cytokine potential downstream response from the Oreos, even though you're in a calorie deficit, or the pizza that you might have sensitivities or food reactions to. Even those inflammatory cytokines will dampen our receptor site activation. And then also from a hypothalamus standpoint, can also start to dampen hormone regulation, those inflammatory cytokines, which again, you can see how this thing can become very cyclic and like you get trapped. So,
and then the psychological side of things, like that psychological stress, right? Like some relationship is not going well. There's, you know, the job isn't going well. I don't like what I do, or I don't like this relationship I'm in, or I don't like, you know, financial situations or chronic stressors. Oftentimes, like, you know, my marriage is bad and it's never going to change, or having these like kind of like depression, anxiety driving situations that tend to last because, you know, from a primitive perspective, you know, caveman just comes out, he might get chased by a bear, but as long as he survives that chase, you know, that stressor goes away, and then all he's got to do is find food. And it's like, find somewhere safe to sleep and eat something and you're staying alive. Nowadays it's like, hey, that deadline that's due in like 2 weeks, and you need 4 weeks to get this project done, that's chronic stressor, that fight or flight reaction, that brain going, oh crap, oh crap, oh crap, oh crap, oh crap, driving these hormone changes, these stress hormone changes, and dampening the hormones that make us feel good. Right. Estrogens and testosterones and progesterones and the things that regulate all these other things, in addition to, you know, the things that tell us, hey, we're full. Like leptin, right? Like leptin sensitivity problems.
If I just sat here and I had a little knife, and you're like, oh, that's scary.
Yeah.
You'd remove yourself from that threat. But if, you know, you have 5 or 6 different threats, whether it's the relationship stress, work stress, it can be any concoction of it. You know, death of a loved one. Like there can be a
sick
whole
kids, or like things that are just like horrifically,
like your phone
like
never,
things you can't get away from.
Right. Especially more and more, like, you know, you used to have a phone that wasn't attached to your hip that would, you know, basically like, I don't call it after 10 o'clock or after 9 o'clock. Now it's like 24/7 you're expected to have basically your eyes on a work phone, right? So it's just, that's a stress in itself. You know, so again, if you saw a threat, you'd remove yourself from it. And so it would be transient or short term, versus when it has this like persistent, like surrounding, saturating effect, it neuroplastically changes you from a hormone to, neurotransmitters. Again, you become more efficient in the environment you're in.
Yep. Yeah. And I mean, even taking it further, like social media in particular, like that dopaminergic pathway that we're just dumping when it's like, here's an image, here's an image, here's an image, here's an image, and we're driving that dopaminergic pathway. Well, that dopamine's got to go somewhere. Mm-hmm. And now all of a sudden at 1 o'clock in the morning, we're wide awake because we've been scrolling since, we try to go to bed, or we scrolled for an hour before we went to bed. And now it's like, now we don't get into deep restful sleep. Now we're screwing up that insulin. Now we're screwing up our sleep cycle. Now we're screwing up
pulse.
Yeah, we're screwing everything up.
Hormone pulses.
Yeah. I mean, this is, again, put your phone down when it gets dark outside, everybody.
Dampen your lights. Like,
yeah.
As soon as the sun's going down, like, overhead lights need to go down.
Yeah.
Like, put on a couple lamps
Mm-hmm.
that are more yellow in nature. And again, start to, like, allow your entire family's brain to start to dim with the sun,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean,
yeah.
so you have
TV
a good sleep
and video
cycle.
games before bed. Like,
Yeah.
video games in particular have a...
Whoa. So Call of Duty,
Yeah.
just going through that,
Yeah.
like, getting chased
Yeah.
by people
And-
on Call of Duty
and-
with blue light is bad for me.
we know these things, but I mean, I have a 9-year-old son, and he'll ask, can I play video games when his little sister goes to bed? He's like, can I play video games for a little bit? It's like,
It's hard to say no sometimes.
it's hard to say no, because it's like, hey, you've got some free time. Yeah, I want you to have fun and do what you want to do. But we've noticed that he doesn't sleep as good. And so it's kind of like, no, we're not going to play video games at 8 o'clock at night.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because
Especially like the games he wants to play, like Star Wars games and even Minecraft and that type of stuff. It's like it's all dopamine driving. That's the whole point of all these things. And that dopaminergic pathway wakes you up.
it has consequences elsewhere,
Mm-hmm.
right? And especially in the adult, it's not going to be as forgiving in terms of like metabolic health.
Mm-hmm.
Other kind of, we talked calories in, calories out.
Mm-hmm.
We talked some of the
Fasting.
neurological,
Yeah.
the intermittent fasting. We talked a little on hormonal in terms of just thyroid, how that's one aspect, and it's often like really piss poor how people look at it. It's like, your TSH is all you need to look at. Maybe T4, you're fine. Yeah, no, you got to have free T3 is active hormone that's unbound to a protein, free to engage with the receptor to have a metabolic effect. Reverse T3 is important. It's going to be potentially some competition to that receptor. Fasting insulin, right? If fasting insulin is probably one of the most sensitive markers for insulin sensitivity issues. And so if you have a glucose that is 85, and that's all they run, they're like, oh, that's great.
Yeah,
awesome
right
blood
in the middle
sugar.
of the range, yeah.
But your insulin's 24. Your HOMA IR calculation, which it is, you can go online, take your fasting insulin, take your glucose. It's a calculation that gets created. I think it's supposed to be less than 1. And so if you look and your HOMA IR score is trending in the wrong direction, you are starting to see insulin resistance, which means, again, you're having issues with that delivery of glucose into the cell for burning, right? For metabolic use.
You can't get the coal into the steam engine.
Which, would you be tired? Would you be moody? Would you be depressed? Would you be weight gain as a symptom?
Yeah.
Would you have less exercise
Which
tolerance?
cells don't get insulin resistant very easy, though?
Fat cells.
Fat cells. So it's like if we got all this sugar floating around in our blood, and our muscle cells and all these other cells that have these GLUT4 receptors.
This is a girl dad problem.
Oh, yeah.
Long
Yeah.
girl dad hair.
Well,
I got those.
so if we have,
Sorry.
if we can't get sugar into muscle cell, but those fat cells are always like, hey, door's always open, let that stuff flow in.
Come on in,
Yeah,
triglycerides.
I'm
Let's
going
do
to be
this.
fatigued. I'm not going to grow muscle very easy. I'm not going to have any muscle, like I'm not going to be able to go and exercise for a very long time. I might be extra sore after working out. All these problems, but those fat cells are just, hey, I'll take you in and growing and growing and growing.
Engorging. And then picture, once they stop having issues, or when they begin to have issues, then you start seeing triglycerides creep up. Oh, now we're like hitting the diagnosis of metabolic syndrome. By the time someone is diabetic or diagnosed with metabolic syndrome, like it's been trending in the wrong direction for at least a decade. I mean, who knows? Longer, probably. But that's why you need to have better, more sensitive predictive markers of those things. Because again, hey, I'll help you lose weight. The doctor goes in, we'll just give you testosterone. Cool. What are you going to do with it? If you have high insulin, you're going to aromatize and see potentially estrogen levels increase and more midsection weight gain.
Yep.
So it's just
more brain fog, more emotional stuff coming up.
yeah. I mean, for the male, you can see more emotional, some ED kick in after. I mean, it just it's it's common to see all these things.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's look at. I mean, I think we've been on this biotransformation detox side of things. I mean, how does that play into physiology? If you're trying to rid inflammatory chemicals out through the GI, but you're not efficient at it, what else might get put into fat cells? What also may start to signal inflammatory loops that upregulate kind of that fat response?
I mean, you might be getting some toxicity. Basically, it's kind of like your liver's going like, I'm trying to get this stuff out, nowhere to put it.
Fat cells are a fairly neutral, kind of inert spot.
Inert, for sure. Basically, it's kind of like this stuff can cause inflammation if it goes in my brain. If I just kind of pack some fat around it and stuff it inside of a fat cell, it's, that fat cell's not going to let it hurt you too much.
Absolutely.
Good little storage area.
We know certain medications can be associated with weight gain. We won't go into too much of that today, but a lot of times, like,
the psychological stuff, like the
SSRIs can be.
For sure, yeah. Birth controls and things like that. You often see weight gain. That's probably one of the most
high estrogen issues, so estrogen detox issues. Like, let's, whether it's high estrogen due to a detox potential problem or high estrogen, like estrogen added on in a synthetic through a birth control, why may that kind of have an effect through to thyroid?
To thyroid?
Yeah.
Well, the way that it signals up to the brain and the way that it's saying, hey, thyroid, like, hey, hypothalamus, like, here's what's going on. You can see some changes in pituitary function. You can see, I mean, if it's in a guy, that's not so good, having that higher estrogen. Well, I guess not coming from birth control on that side of things. When we have, bringing it back to the testosterone, like, if we're having a testosterone injection and it aromatizes the estrogen and the estrogenic effect on hypothalamic pituitary output, for sure.
I mean, I was kind of the other thing I was thinking is like your sex hormone binding globulin, your thyroid binding globulin is going to get pulled up
together. Yeah.
So what's going to happen, unfortunately, is your free hormone's going to potentially dip.
And this is really common. Actually really common.
So that's also why another lab marker to look is sex hormone binding globulin. Your thyroid, can you let go of the hormone so it can have a conversation with the cell that's about metabolism? That's where you can see a surplus of estrogen and different, even chemicals can have an impact, right? Yeah. Whether, a lot of times you may see on the lab standpoint, if you look at total proteins, you may see total proteins like globulins creeping above 2.4. You may see albumin going high because albumin wants to bind various toxins and hormones as well. So those are other ways to extrapolate that information.
High total protein.
High total protein. Are really, again, trying to be like, why might that be high? Is it an intelligent response to try to trap and kind of bind something that is, it's better to hold on and kind of try to minimize its effect versus let it be liberated and be damaging to
better
tissue.
To have the criminal sitting in the back of the cop car than it is to let that criminal run around the neighborhood.
Let's go through that. So if we have that criminal or that taxi out, right? Whether, and this is again going in, I'm thinking from a GI standpoint now. Now you're constipated. We talked a little bit about this on the not a little bit, a decent chunk, a decent amount.
And with the estrogen, women's hormone.
So now you like the person who's trying to lose weight doesn't go to the bathroom. They poop every 3 or 4 days. Is that a problem?
I mean, it always is a problem to not be going to the bathroom every day.
It's never normal?
It's never normal.
Okay. So we're on the same page on that. So,
yeah.
But again, think about that. So like even, going back into your body is constantly trying to rid itself of, metabolites and waste and toxins. And if you're constipated, you're going to have a slower elimination and a higher potential for reabsorption. And again, so those are commonly overlooked in the weight gain story. What else are we missing here on the weight gain? I mean, on the hormonal front, there's a lot of...
Trying to lose weight and I think activity, right? The type of activity. I walk.
Right. Which, again, isn't bad from a metabolic rate, right? I mean, hey, I got my 10,000 steps, and it's like, great. But what is the most endocrine, like basically calorie, like burning machine you have? Like your thermogenic compass.
You gotta work hard. Like, you gotta do something that gets your heart rate up. You gotta do something that gets your metabolism going. You gotta do something that probably gets you into an anaerobic state.
and stimulates muscle.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, was it for every pound of muscle, how many calories are burned a month? Was it 1,500?
It's like,
I can't remember. This is going back.
It's a lot. Yeah. For every pound of muscle versus a pound of fat, like how metabolically demanding those are. It's like the muscle is so metabolic, and it's so much smaller when you look at, you can see these things online. People have like what 1 pound of muscle looks like, and then here's a pound of fat, and it's like 3 or 4 times the volume.
So I had a patient recently kind of just come in and say, hey, look, I'm a little like stressed out. Like I know I went on the scale. I'm only 2 pounds lighter, yet I've like my pants are fitting way bigger. And I had kind of this like, it's okay. Because again, like you've been, over this time, they also reintroduce exercise. So, they hadn't been exercising for a while, and they kind of got back into, what are they doing? They're also putting on muscle mass. So I'm like, your composition is changing. So like if we did like some type of measurement where we measured lean body mass versus total fat percentage, like we would have seen the numbers there work in your favor. So I don't want you to be discouraged from like not losing the 10 to 20 pounds that you want to lose. You've lost 2 or 3 pounds in still 3 weeks, but you also have likely put on some muscle mass, but you've lost inches around your waist. Like you've had family members noticing like, hey, look, like your pants are different. Like so again, sometimes it's good to, as a provider, to make sure we measure lean body mass. And that's also going to be the biggest determinant of your metabolic rate, like how many calories you should be at least hitting as a kind of target if you want to calculate it.
Yep.
But
yeah, I think, was it McGill University? They did the kind of high intensity versus like aerobic exercise.
Like, are you talking about Gabala?
Yeah.
Dr. Calton's buddy? Yeah, that's McMaster.
So. McMaster.
I think it's
McGill and McMaster. It's one of those sketchy
tomato.
Yeah. and basically,
Canadian,
like,
Dr. Nuts just,
the study, I think it was 3 times a week of 15-minute sessions of high intensity interval versus 5 sessions of 1 hour like basically aerobic exercise, basically like jogging on a treadmill. And it was like high intensity interval for 45 minutes a week versus 5 hours, 45 minutes versus 5 hours of aerobic exercise. And the group who did 15-minute sessions 3 times a week lost more weight.
Yeah, we saw better
better changes in body composition.
As well as, I think it was like, didn't they go and look at, or it might have been a different study, but I think it's still looking at like brain-derived neurotrophic factor, like even growth factor aspects for the brain were positive in terms of like intensity of the exercise.
Yeah.
Moral of the story.
Growth hormone, like you have to stimulate it. Yeah. The only way we can really stimulate growth hormone is through telling our body, you better be stronger. If you're gonna lift these weights, if you're gonna do this exercise, if you're gonna do this difficult thing, I'm gonna make your body be more capable of doing it.
So good sleep and stress muscle tissue.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and again, there's probably, we can, kind of the other thing we talked about wanting to talk about, because there are people who are like, look, I've hacked all these things. So there are times people are, genetically more resistant to calorie restricted weight loss. And again, this is kind of that little annoying part of why you can have a bunch of propped up social media experts on, hey, it's just calories in, calories out. We got to get you moving it. Again, if you're under methylator of your PON3 gene, there's research that shows you may not be the best to respond to calorie deficit. And so
intermittent fasting, all these different types of, the fads.
Yeah, or just, hey, I'm eating 20% of my estimated basal metabolic rate, yet I'm not losing weight over a month or 2 months. And again, that's times where our medical providers are like, look, we have good data showing that they actually do respond well with some of the peptides for weight and support, whether it's a combination of ones to help with muscle composition and some insulin sensitivity. That's kind of where those tools are good to use. It's not always the cheapest to test those. I think it's like $500 to test that. That's we use a company called True Diagnostics for that. They do kind of like baseline, like here's your biological age based on your biochemistry or your intrinsic age, but here's your chronological age. Are you genetically your age, or are you older, or are you actually really younger because you've done a good job kind of protecting it? And they run some your immune system age. It's a pretty interesting test, but they can tell you, are you under methylator? that may, again, determine how we choose about, our team implementing some weight loss strategies. So, well, I know we were wanting to keep this fairly short, and again, we've kind of deviated. I hope this was helpful. This is, again, the same old song and dance. This is educational. This is not meant to be medical advice. If you have questions regarding your health, your weight, please, you can reach out, or please ask your medical providers. Till next time.
Take care.